In addition to the sonata, which again is for a piano or piano and one other instrument generally, the symphony and the concerto were both for full orchestra. Chamber music, again, I already talked about chamber music groups. Chamber music was designed to be written for smaller groups, usually string quartets or piano quintet, something like that. The biggest difference in those, and again, is chamber music, everything is played by one instrument as far as their part. One instrument plays their particular part. Where in a symphony, there are multiple instruments playing the same part. Now, very important guy to worry about is that word sonata. We already talked about how sonata is a musical work, but it can also be a type of musical form. Now we're going to cover him in extensive, well, how should I say? We're going to cover him extensively in a couple slides from now. So when you look over on this PowerPoint here and you see under typical movement sonata form, this does not mean, suppose you're playing in a symphony, that suddenly the symphony is quiet and, oh, now just the piano and a trumpet play. Sonata form is different than a sonata. We will talk about that again in a little bit. Opera remained the dominant vocal form during the classic period, and the biggest differences between the classic period and the Baroque period lie in how the music was really used within the opera. In the Baroque period, music was more as a background for the singer. But during the classic period, the music became a whole series of moods. It set up everything that was going on and set the mood for each scene that was going on. And even during the recitatives and arias, the music was more about setting a mood than being exactly subservient to the singer. So at times the music was just as important as what was being sung to the action. And that's an example of the music being program music. Sonata form was primarily the most common form used as a first movement for sonatas, symphonies, concertos, and string quartets. Now, again, the sonata form is different than a sonata, so you might have sonata form taking place as one movement of a sonata, but it doesn't mean they're the same word. It's one of those tricky things. You have to kind of separate them by their use. Anyway, sonata form generally has three primary parts. We'll have an exposition, which sets up your main theme of whatever the piece is. So if we have our main okay, and that goes on for a while, great. After that goes on, it often repeats. Then there'll be a secondary theme, and that is in a different key. Okay, doesn't necessarily go to a specific key, but it's in a different key than the original. So if our first little exposition is going on for a while, the next one they might come in which okay, I think C is the second one. The first one sounded like G. Alright, doesn't matter. But we had a second key. Now, after that has gone on for a while, and that is the primary part of the sonata form, will be the exposition. It is the longest section of the song. And we have a development. The development really kind of can go any direction you want it to, but it usually takes little fragments of the themes that were used in the exposition, puts them in various keys, changes them around rhythmically, changes what instruments play them, just messes with them. It does all kinds of strange things to the original keys, our original themes, but usually only small sections of them. Generally, the development is not very long. And when it's over, we come to the recapitulation, which is essentially the exposition being played again, but without two different keys. Now, a lot of times you will have an introduction, which is not necessary to make it sonata form, but if you do, well, that's one more part to the form. And a lot of times you'll have a coda. Coda is just an ending. Could come after the recapitulation. So the sonata form has to have its three elements, the exposition, development, and recapitulation, but it can have as many as 5 in an introduction, then the exposition, then the development, then the recapitulation, then a coda. Please take notes on what I am saying, because you will be tested on this and the order that these fall in. Alright, theme and variations, pretty easy to follow just by his name. It's usually used as the second part of a larger form, like a symphony or orchestra. It's usually the second movement. And all it really is a primary theme has variations written upon it. Sometimes those variations could be its dynamic level, sometimes it might be which instruments play it, sometimes you might change what was a homophonic idea into a polyphonic texture. The key or mode is often changed. Usually when those things happen, they just continue as the piece moves forward. But occasionally you'll have little fragments of the theme. You'll stop and you might change the tempo that you played it at. You might change the meter. So if the piece was in 4, you might try to play a similar idea in 3, for example. Any number of things you want to do to the original theme to vary upon it, well, that's part of a theme and variations. Again, this is usually the second movement of a larger piece.